for the next show is about to begin.
I'll do some.
Sorry. So welcome everybody. Now my name is Constance and you won't know me because I've been dead for 20 years. And I've just come over the boundaries just to see you today. So I lived here 40 years ago. And I'm very glad to say, I lived actually in this cedarwood bungalow, and I'm so glad to see there's still remnants of me here in this very garden. For example, that stone where the squirrel is, the stone bath there, I love watching the birds. So that was one of my things I bought. And then there's a little bird bath at the back there, and it's still here after all these years. I just can't express how glad I am to see that. And if you go deep under that lilac bush, when I left this earth, my friend Cornelia, a brass plaque in my memory, at the bottom of that lilac, it was a little bush, and now it's a huge tree. So some things go on, and some things remain the same. So I basically came up here to retire with my good friend Doris. We came up from Lytham St Anne's, and I met her at the Spiritualist Church. Now you might think, why is she going to a Spiritualist church? It's usually to get in contact with somebody on the other side. Well, this is exactly the reason I used to go. Because I was engaged to Ted, and we'd bought a house, and he was my beloved fiancé. We had no hanky-panky in those days, so I was just saving myself for Ted. I had 3 days to go before the wedding, and he was in the RAF, and yes, you've guessed it, I got a telegram to say he was missing in action. I could never believe he was really dead, that he'd actually left me. I couldn't believe it. So I'd go to the Spiritualist churches around St Anne's and Lytham, wanting a message from the other side. I never got one down there. But when I moved up here, I was lucky enough to be able to buy this bungalow, and my friend Doris, her bungalow is still called Doris, and she was on the other side of the runway. If you look when you leave, you'll see the word Doris. And we had such a time together. I would say to Kaido, that he was the gardener, and I believe he still is in this place, Kaido, I'd say, look, I want you to cut the bushes and the trees so I can get a clear line through to Doris. And he would obey me, because in those days I was quite formidable. I wasn't aggressive, but I somehow always got my own way. And so, because Doris and I used to have curtains, and we, depending on what we did with our curtains, lowering them, opening them, closing them, we had our own code. Things like, come for tea, dinners on the table, those sorts of everyday things. So Doris and I were very, very close. Well, this particular day we went off, she had a car, which was very handy, and we went off to Nairn Spiritualist Church. I don't know if that Spiritualist Church is still going there, but there, as soon as I walked in, I could sense something. I had these shivers up and down my spine, and the medium immediately started saying, there's a message for somebody in this hall, and I knew it was going to be me. And what she said is, I've got a message here, I don't understand it, she said, but whoever is the recipient of this message will understand it. The licorice salts are waiting for you. Well, you could have knocked me down with a feather, because that's exactly what I would put out for Ted. A little bowl of licorice salts every time he came in from work, or before he went off to the war, and this was his own little treat and our own little treat together. And the medium, this was her message. So sadly, I knew that he had actually passed over at this point. There was no more point in hanging on, even years after, waiting for him to return to me. I knew in some ways I was then at rest. So me and Doris, we would have our days out, but I was very handy. In those days we used to make and mend, we always had something on the go. So this particular one, I didn't finish back then, but I saw it at my friend Veronica's, and I thought, well, I'll just carry it a little bit more. while I'm on this side of the planet, and then I'll just carry on doing a bit more. If I ever come back to you again, I can continue doing it. So what we used to do in those days, that I would make my hobbies into something I could contribute to the community. So another hobby of mine was rambling. So I would go to the Trees for Life and volunteer. We were always busy. Everyone was busy back in those days. I seem to remember that familiar face there. I can't remember your name, dearie, but I seem to remember your face. You were back there back in the day, weren't you? What is your name again?
Barbara.
Barbara, yes. And how we were all, I probably just was an old lady to you back in those days, but how we were all so busy. So I would help Alan. He's still around with us. He's still with you. He's not on my side in the Trees for Life. And I also loved reading. So, but I noticed there were no facility here. There was no facility here. There were no books anywhere. People were so busy, but some of us oldies, we like to sit down of a night and light our gas fires and have a good old read. So I thought, well, I'm not asking any permission. I'm just going to start a library. And that's exactly what I did. I wrote to all my friends back in St Anne's, asked them to send up books that they didn't need. And this library grew and grew, and it became a hub for the whole community. We would go to the library, we would exchange our news, exchange our views. Some of the young ones would come to me with their various problems, because there's always problems amongst the young ones. And I felt like I was contributing in my own way. I couldn't go out with, this is a typical picture of Peter Caddy. When the bungalows were just being built. So if you'd like to pass that around, this bungalow here. I couldn't go out with a spade and do all the spade work that they used to do, that the young men especially, and actually the young women, and I couldn't do all that. So I would contribute in my own way. One famous way I would contribute is to fundraisers and provide scones for the workers. Now this is my original recipe. I couldn't believe it that my friend Veronica has kept it these 40 years. It was still in her recipe book. And I would, so I would make scones for the lads and the lasses who are working around. I would fundraise. Again, I was using my hobby to help with the community. So we have a few scones in the back there with this same recipe. So maybe my able assistant, this lovely young lady there, I've forgotten your name, dearie. What's your name? Svetlana. Thank you, dearie. Maybe you could hand out some of my famous scone recipe. And yeah, I'm glad to see that there are still some smiling faces here. Back in the day, we did have a marvellous time, but things were also difficult for us. And when my friend, especially, it was very difficult for me when my friend passed, Doris. Now, Doris, between you and me, Doris had never known a man, if you know what I mean. And when she passed away, my friend Cornelia, she was a doctor in those days. There she is, with Doris. And there I am there with another friend. We were always gadding about and going out for lunch and things. So when my friend Doris sadly passed away, Cornelia was the first to tell me, I was not going to give her back to a man. She's never known a man in this life, and she's not going to be given over to the undertaker now. So I decided we would do a homemade funeral. So it was the first of its kind in those days. I wasn't very confrontative or aggressive in my attitude, but I somehow managed to get what I wanted. And so we dressed the body ourselves, we did what we needed to do, and then we needed a big car to take it to the funeral house, to the crematorium. What's the word you say? The crematorium, thank you. Yeah. Some of my words, I'm still in between layers, so I haven't quite got all the words. And the only person in those days with a big enough car was, some of you might know him, was David Hammond. And so Doris's body was put into the back of David Hammond's saloon and taken off to the crematorium. And I was so happy that I did that for Doris. And by the same token, I was out on one of our many lunches out with my friends and Doris in her car when she was still alive. And I went to the West Coast and I said to them all, oh, I would love to rest here. And they remembered. And so when I passed away and they had my ashes, my friend Veronica, who is still on this plane, she's still up in the village, she took my ashes. They took it off to the West Coast and my ashes were scattered upon those shores. So if you're ever walking along the West Coast and you hear the clacking of needles or the needle point going in and out or the passing of pages, I'm still there in the air and I'm still around here. As you can see, and still remnants of me in this garden. And thank you so much for coming and being that interested in my story as Constance Marcham.